Now before we get into making the chicken cacciatore of my dreams, we must get started making the side to go with it. And today we're going to be serving Kenji's potatoes. So let's just jump right into it. Now Kenji Lopez Alt needs no introduction, but I will leave a link to his recipe down below. And we're going to start with 2 russet potatoes, which I'm going to wash, dry them, then cut them in half lengthwise, then sit each half flat side down and cut into half again, and then cut those into large chunks. You don't want anything too small or it might overcook. Then into a pot of water. So the potatoes are covered with water, and now Kenji's trick is adding baking soda. Baking soda is alkaline, and that alkaline breaks down the outside of those potatoes, creating like this sort of starchy slurry on the outside that allows it to get super crisp on the outside while staying creamy on the inside. So we're gonna just bring this up to a boil, and then just add about a 1/4 teaspoon to a 1/2 teaspoon to this mixture once it's boiling. I'm also gonna season it with some salt, and then I'm gonna go ahead and add that 1/4 teaspoon of the baking soda to the pot, give it a stir. Then we wanna bring it up to a boil, then lower the heat to maintain a nice simmer. And we just wanna cook these for maybe 15-20 minutes, but the time is not important, it's the texture. Once I take my hands and try and pinch it, it feels like the cells of the potato are about to collapse in my finger. If you use a fork, it should be fork tender. You wanna take them to before they start falling apart like this one, but even that is okay. You wanna turn the heat off, and you want to drain the water out, return them back into that pot. You see the sort of starch building up on the outside? Almost looks like the accumulation of snow. It's hard to see on camera. Then what we want to do, toss in some oil. I've got a 450-degree oven preheated. Toss in a little salt, gently stir it around. And as you stir it, that starch is going to start to break up on the outside, and it's going to look like it's falling apart, but that's actually what you want. That buildup of starch on the outside is going to get extra crispy when we roast it. So get a sheet tray, and we're going to get a little oil onto that sheet tray, and then the potatoes go right on there. And then I'm just going to take my time and make sure the widest area of the potato is making contact with the surface of the pan to maximize the crispiness, and then into the oven, and we're just gonna let those cook, and they're gonna take about 30 to 40 minutes. Now, chicken cacciatore translates into hunter's stew, and it originated somewhere in central Italy, but really variations can be found everywhere. And it dates back as early as the Renaissance, over 700 years ago. So this dish is very old and beloved. Supposedly, the hunters would find all sorts of goodies on their way back from hunting, like mushrooms. Back in those times, chicken probably wasn't the protein of choice. It was probably some kind of rabbit or wild game. And it was a dish suitable to be thrown together in sort of a makeshift oven or stove. People added things like onions and olives. People would eventually also add tomatoes, which weren't around during the Renaissance, along with wine to add flavor and create like a sauce and help tenderize the meat. So for me, this is sort of like a build your own adventure recipe. We're gonna take the basis of what chicken cacciatore is and just pound it with flavor and treat the chicken properly so that at the end we have an easy to eat, packed with flavored dish that is comforting, and it will soothe your soul, and you will be addicted to this chicken cacciatore recipe, I promise. Once we clean and remove the stems of the mushrooms, I'm just gonna take them and sort of quarter them, just so we have some bite-sized pieces. You know these are gonna shrink by about half. So if they're really small, I might just keep them whole, or cut them in half like that. Now once you've cut all the mushrooms, then you move on to the bell pepper. I like to cut the top off to create a flat side for it to stand on, and then shave the meat off the pepper so that there's no white pith remaining. Then I'm gonna cut into short strips from the short side of the pepper, not the longer side, just to make more bite-sized pieces. Then for the onion, cut the top and the root off, remove the skins, and then thinly slice around the curvature of the onion until it gets really small, and then turn that little onion nub until it's on its flatter side, and then continue slicing. Then take a few cloves of garlic, slice those thinly, and once all the vegetables are chopped, tie together a little bundle of fresh thyme and fresh rosemary. And then we're on to making our secret little flavor bomb mixture of Calabrian chili peppers, cherry peppers packed in oil, and capers. Often you'll find olives in this dish, but if you know me, I don't like olives. So these are my weapons of choice. Just add a tablespoon of the chopped Calabrian chili, about a half of the jar of the cherry peppers, and some of the juices it's packed in for some bright acidity, and then about a tablespoon or 2 of capers. This little mixture right here is going to be the secret to why this cacciatore is so good. We're gonna prep some kale, but we need to check the potatoes first. One side is crisped up nicely, so I'm gonna take out a metal spatula and just scrape and release them from the pan and give them a flip so that the pale side of the potatoes are now touching the bottom of the pan and they can brown. And then back into the oven and continue cooking until they're all crispy and brown all over. Now, kale isn't really found in this dish, but I love it and it adds a heartiness and some greens to the dish. We just need to wash it, so I'm gonna tear small pieces off the rib, let that soak in water until I'm ready to use it, and now we're ready to cook. And then I also want to add a bay leaf. Now, before we get into the next step, I gotta talk to you about groceries thanks to our sponsor today, Hungry Root. Hungry Root is a personalized, tech-enabled grocery store that makes it easy to eat healthy. You let them know a little bit about yourself, then each week Hungry Root delivers fresh groceries along with recipes straight to your door. You start by taking a short fun quiz before signing up, showing how you like to eat, your dietary needs, and your goals, whether it's eating more plants, discovering new flavors or recipes, or saving money or time in the kitchen. If you want Hungry Root to send you personalized weekly deliveries filled with healthy groceries, basically like a pre-filled grocery cart built according to your dietary needs and preferences, along with recipes that will utilize all those ingredients. Or if you're like me, you can sort of take control of things and shop like normal for the ingredients you want to use in your recipes, or mine like I'm doing today. When your delivery arrives at your doorstep, you can mix and match groceries that you have in your fridge already, or use recipes they put together for you. And Hungry Root is going to offer the first 100 people who use my code NotAnotherCookingShow40 are gonna get 40% off their first grocery order with Hungry Root. Use the link down in the show notes or go to hungryroot.com and use NotAnotherCookingShow40 to get 40% off your grocery order. Now back into the recipe. So onto the chicken, and I'm using boneless, skinless chicken thighs. Maybe it's the picky eater deep down inside coming out, but who wants to cut around bone in a dish like this? I mean, seriously. I want to consider the final bite, and I also only want to use a fork to eat it. So season on all sides of the chicken and then dredge them in flour. I don't know where I saw this trick to use a mesh strainer, but it's cool because it helps prevent wasting a bunch of flour when you're dredging something. Now we can move on to the stove. In a large Dutch oven on medium-high heat, add some olive oil once it's hot, and then begin to add a few pieces of the chicken at a time and begin to sear them. Let them cook for a few minutes on that side. Maybe you give them a rotate around so they brown evenly. And then once they're nicely golden brown on that one side, flip the chicken and cook for a few minutes on the other side. Then you want to transfer the chicken into a bowl while you go through and sear the rest of the pieces of chicken. You just want to take your time here. You won't overcook the chicken, but you also don't want to start burning the flour with too high a heat in the pan. So if you need to, adjust the heat as necessary. Once all the chicken is browned, add the mushrooms directly to the hot pan. Season with salt and cook those mushrooms hot and fast. They're gonna suck up that oil, so add a bit more if needed. And once the mushrooms start to smell a bit roasty in the pan after a few minutes of cooking, add the garlic and a little bit more oil if needed. And once that garlic starts to get aromatic, then we can add the onions and the pepper straight into the pan. Season those with salt and cook until the onions and peppers begin to soften. Once they soften, in goes that flavor bomb mixture. And once you add that to the pan, you're gonna get hit with this amazing aroma of the cherry peppers and the Calabrian chili, and already the flavors are starting to come together. Then start to add in the kale. Season that kale with salt. You wanna add seasoning to each layer. Let that wilt a bit, and then add 2 hefty tablespoons of tomato paste. Stir that tomato paste in, get everything incorporated. And we wanna cook that down until we start to see some caramelization developing on the bottom of the pan. As soon as you see that, you can deglaze with some of that white wine, and with a flat bottom spoon, scrape up all those bits off the bottom of the pan. And then add that herb bundle and the bay leaf, and then add that tomato puree. Just a jar of tomato passata is fine here. Then fill that jar back up with water to thin out that sauce. It's going to reduce over the cook, so we want to account for that by adding a bit of water at this stage. Once the sauce is thinned out, season it with salt, which I forgot to do. Then we can add the chicken back into the sauce, along with any of the juices that accumulated in that bowl, and then finish with a pinch of some dried oregano. Bring that entire mixture up to a boil, and by now those potatoes should be nice and brown and crispy. Remove those from the oven, drop the temperature of the oven down to 425, and then add the potted chicken into the oven uncovered and set a timer for 1 hour and 15 minutes. We'll likely need to cook this longer, but we want to set that timer and check it at that point. Now we can take a look at our potatoes, and they are quite perfect, I must say. Hear that? See that? Beautiful, perfect, crispy outside, fluffy, steamy inside. That's what we call perfect potato. This kid Kenji knows what he's doing. We're gonna set this all to the side. They should hold nicely, and if they need to be reheated, we'll just throw them in the oven at the end. And we're gonna let that cook for about 1 hour and 15 minutes. About halfway through, we're gonna give it a check and just sort of zhuzh it around a little bit. Make sure some of those chicken pieces from the bottom come to the top and brown a little bit, and then back into the oven. See that? That's already looking good. And now when we get that back into the pan, I'm also just gonna throw those potatoes back in. They've gone cold, we can just toss them in and get them hot again. Let them cook for another 20 minutes or so until the timer's up, and it'll get them hot again. So then once the timer's up, we're gonna bring it out, we're gonna give it a check. It's not quite as tender as I want it. I kinda want it just barely holding together, trying to fall apart. So back in the oven, I'm gonna cook it for another 15, 20 minutes. I know I said it to 1 hour and 15, but that's a mistake, so ignore it. And then after about 15 or 20 minutes more, or total cooking time at around 1 hour and 30 to 1 hour and 40 minutes, that chicken is buttery, it's tender, that sauce coats it. It's absolute perfection, and we're ready to plate it. In a nice rounded bowl, we're gonna add a bunch of those crispy potatoes to the center, and then we're gonna start to spoon in those beautiful tender pieces of chicken that are nicely coated in that sauce. Depending on the size of chicken, if they're small, I go with 4. If they're bigger, maybe you can do 2 to 3. And then on top of all that chicken, finish it up with just a ton of that sauce with all those goodies that are in that pot. And we're also gonna serve this with bread, so you're gonna wanna be generous with that sauce. Then we're gonna finish it with some Parmesan cheese, some fresh parsley, and if it doesn't tear like butter, then you did it wrong. Just needs a touch of salt. I think I forgot to season the tomato sauce as it went in. Just gotta make sure that you season all the way through and that you taste it one last time before serving it. You see how I can just use a fork? The meat just shreds apart. It's saucy. You got some nice braised kale in there. This is the most flavorful, heartiest chicken cacciatore you're ever gonna make. Serve it on some crusty bread. You got a little chicken cacciatore sandwich. This recipe and all my recipes are gonna be linked down in the description. That's all that I have today. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and go feed yourself.